Hi, it's Mimi at Giggly Guppy. Today we're going to read the final three stories from this fantastic book, Unlikely Friendships by Jennifer S. Holland. As you can see, my buddy, the marvelous Mr. Mittens, is grooming himself. Oh, he's on the move. He's on the move. He's just resettling. All right. So our first story took place in Kenya in 2005, and it's called The Tortoise and the Hippo. It has fast become one of the most famous examples of interspecies friendship ever told. Reptiles aren't typically known for their warm, fuzzy natures, nor are hippos. The story goes that when the deadly December 2004 tsunami hit the Kenyan coast near the village of Malindi, the waves swept away all but one hippo of a pod wallowing in the Sabaki River. This lone survivor was a 600-pound baby that villagers managed with colossal effort to capture and transport to the Haller Park Wildlife Sanctuary in Mombasa. Hippos can be aggressive and ill-tempered, even toward their own kind. So baby Owen, named after one of his human rescuers, was placed in an enclosure along with small, gentle animals like vervet monkeys, bushbucks, and as it happened, a 130-year-old Aldabra giant tortoise named Mazee. That's when strange and wonderful things started to happen. Owen immediately approached Mazee and crouched down behind him as if hiding behind a great boulder. Mazee moved away, seeming annoyed, but the hippo persisted, and by the next morning the two had managed a sort of awkward cuddle. Hippos in the wild crowd near each other, but except for mothers and young, they don't really bond socially. Giant tortoises also hang out in herds without forming any great attachments. The young hippo, perhaps craving motherly attention, found something comforting in an old, set in his ways reptile, a pairing as unlikely as they come. Hippo babies usually stay with their mothers for 4 years, learning how to be hippos. In this case, Owen began learning how to be a tortoise. According to Haller Park's manager Paula Kahumbu, he began copying Mazee's feeding behaviors, chewing on the same grasses. He'd ignore other hippos, bellowing elsewhere in the park, and he was most active during the day, which is the opposite of typical hippo behavior, but in line with tortoise preferences. The two followed each other around, wallowed together in the pond, and slept side by side, meaty torso against time-worn shell. Owen became protective of his reptile companion and affectionate toward him, licking Mazee's face as the tortoise rested his head on Owen's belly. I can just see that. I can just visualize it. Scientists have been most fascinated with how the two animals develop their own physical and verbal language. With gentle nips and nudges to feet or tails, they told each other when to move and in which direction. They sounded off back and forth with deep rumbling sounds not typical of either animal. What strikes me is how sophisticated their mutual communication system became, says animal behaviorist Barbara King. It's a dynamic dance between two species with no preset program on how to deal with each other. And it can't just be instinct because one was shaping its behavior to the other. Quite amazing. And there they are. The only picture for this story. It's a good one though. The next story took place in South Africa in 2005, and it's titled The White Rhino and the Billy Goat. The Rhino and Lion Nature Reserve, located on the high plateau region of inland South Africa, is named for two of its most charismatic beasts. Owned by stockbroker Ed Hearn, the place in its early years was just an old farm with a modest collection of two white rhinos. It now houses more than 600 game animals representing 25 species. One of the animals was a 6-month-old rhino calf that had been brought to the reserve after her mother was killed by poachers. The calf was spotted cowering by her mother's carcass, and it was decided she should be hand-reared until she was old enough to fend for herself among other rhinos. But a half-year rhino gulps down gallon after gallon of milk each day, and acquiring a trough of the drink on a daily basis was difficult. Fortunately, a South African dairy supplier offered to sponsor enough milk replacement formula to feed the beast. The charitable company was called Clover, and from then on, so was the rhino. Clover craved constant attention, says Lorinda Hearn, the daughter of the reserve's owner. That's not surprising for an animal typically inseparable from its mother for its first 18 months of life. For a while, a human handler kept her company, virtually a full-time job. At this point, the youngster's daily milk intake was at least 14 gallons. At meal times, she'd impatiently await her massive drink with childlike squealing and foot stomping. But as the rhino ballooned to over 600 pounds, the position of rhino chaperone became increasingly dangerous. Although Clover was extremely gentle, her sheer bulk meant that she could easily crush a human foot, or worse, by simply being too rambunctious. Human efforts at discipline were useless at tempering the little rhino's exuberance. And anyway, it was not ideal to let her become too attached to humans, as it would make her an easy target for poachers in the future. But solo But solo living wasn't good for Clover, and she soon fell ill. A local vet diagnosed her with a stomach ulcer, a condition she believed was related to stress and loneliness. Clover needed a new friend, but no other young rhinos were on hand, so in an experimental move, a tame adult billy goat was ushered into Clover's pen. As expected, Clover was very cautious about the new resident, sniffing and nudging him at every opportunity. Unfortunately, her new neighbor was annoyed by the invasive behavior. He charged at her, head lowered aggressively in the same way that goats establish a hierarchy when they're among other goats. Clover meekly retreated to a safer distance, but within minutes, she'd take her chances and approach again. Even though Clover loomed like a giant over the goat, the smaller animal wasn't intimidated and proved himself the dominant member of the pair. Clover was so thrilled at having a friend, even a moody and temperamental one, she seemed happy to consent to his terms. So precious. Within a week or two, the rhino and the goat, aptly, if somewhat unimaginatively named Goat, were inseparable. The gruff Billy impatiently indulged Clover when she wanted to play chase, marked by the rhino's excited squeals and satisfied grunts. Rhino squeals and grunts. When Clover was napping, Goat would deftly clamber onto her back and use her as a lookout point to scout the area. Clover, meanwhile, generously shared her shelter, food, and toys and was totally devoted to her new companion. She followed him relentlessly, his 1,200-pound lapdog. Despite Goat's occasional irritation at her persistence, Lorinda says the two cuddled up together at bedtime. Reserve staff wondered that Goat might be flattened. Reserve staff worried that Goat might be flattened under his weighty, sleepy partner, but no such accidents happened, and it was Goat's presence day and night, they are certain, that brought about a complete turnaround in Clover's health. She fattened up and her mood brightened. With a companion nearby, all was well. And again, there's only one picture for that story, but I will show you again. And I love the part of the story that said that the goat jumped up. That goat jumped up on Clover. I can just see that goat standing on Clover's back, as goats do. They climb on everything. And our final story from this whole book, our final story, took place in 2008 in Texas in the United States, and it's called The Zebra and the Gazelle. Here's a quick tale about a gazelle that found an unlikely protector in a striped horse. First, picture a young gazelle in the wild. It's a fragile and vulnerable thing that browses the open grasslands and mountain deserts of Africa, Arabia, and India. The petite ungulate's best defense against aggressive types, usually predatory cats, is to run for its life and to be just a bit swifter than the gazelle running beside it. The Houston Zoo's gazelle will never need to flee an enemy of any kind, it appears. According to curator Daryl Hoffman, the zoo has a large multi-species exhibit with warthog, zebra, giant eland, nyala, a South African antelope, and a lone male Dorcas gazelle, the littlest variety. When we put these animals together a few years ago, we were concerned for the safety of the gazelle, he says. Zebras are known to be aggressive toward young or small antelope and have been known to kill newborns. So they kept a close eye on the situation. In the wild, a gazelle, fearful of a potential aggressor, might be seen pronking away on all fours as if on pogo sticks. Ah, yes. I can see that. I feel like I have seen that on film before. To everyone's surprise and delight, one of the female zebras in the mixed-up herd formed a strong relationship with the gazelle. She began to hang out with him all the time, watching over him when he rested, following him around as he wandered, and nudging the smaller mammal to join her when she was ready to move from one spot to another in their enclosure, as a mother zebra might do to her foal. In a wilder setting, of course, these two-hoofed animals would have to part ways. Dorcas gazelles typically migrate fairly locally, being well adapted to their arid home and sometimes even surviving without a major water source, getting their liquid from the plants they eat. But zebras' hunger, thirst, and desire to mate send them traveling great distances as the seasons change, joining epic migrations of wildebeest and other nomadic herds in search of greener, wetter lands. But in the safe haven of the zoo, those natural instincts are sometimes supplanted by other instincts. In the case of the zebra and the gazelle, it would seem maternal instincts simply won out. When the zoo staff introduced a new warthog to the group, for instance, the zebra became extremely protective of the gazelle, as if knowing the big pig could be temperamental. Whenever the warthog approached, she would step between them, making sure the hog couldn't get too close, says Hoffman. Especially notable was an incident when the gazelle injured himself and the zebra stepped up her guard. As the staff came in to treat the injured animal, the zebra became frantic and pushed against him, trying to persuade him to get up and out of human reach. When he wouldn't budge, the zebra tried to block us from approaching, Hoffman recalls. The gazelle was eventually removed and treated in the zoo's clinic. On his return to the exhibit, Hoffman says the animals were at first tentative around each other, but after a few days, zebra and gazelle had a reunion, ungulate style. Now they're clopping through life side by side once again. And there they are. And that is the end of the book. We read all the stories. Well, for the most part. We read all the stories that I felt were happy enough to read. So we'll read another book next. This was a great book. Jennifer S. Holland, you did a wonderful job. Thank you for writing this book. And thank you for joining me, everyone. I hope that you will let me know which story was your favorite, either from today's stories or all the stories that we've read in the book if one stands out to you. And I look forward to seeing you next time to read you more happy animal stories to make you smile.